Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Modern Mind interview series, where we talk to real people just like you who are doing their best to be their best, but who also have an area of expertise in something fascinating in the world of mental fitness. So today I have with me Yotam Schachter, who's going to be talking to us a lot about a lot of things. So with that, I'd like to welcome you. This is actually one of my more special conversations because Yotam is also a student of a lot of different disciplines, all related to what we call mental fitness. But with that, I would love you to share your story with the group.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I have been studying a lot of things related to well-being. I often use the language of emotional fitness. So when we started talking and you used mental fitness, I resonate there really naturally. Um, I spent a lot of my early life through my 20s thinking I was going to become a rabbi. My father was a
Oh,
rabbi and a something of a leader in the liberal Jewish world, and I wanted to be just like him. And like him, I wanted to help people use our traditional practices to be the best versions of themselves, to be wiser, kinder, more courageous, showing up and creating a world that we want to live in locally and globally. And I gathered a lot of skills and tools and frameworks that I thought would make me a better rabbi. And then I started the formal training and discovered like this actually isn't quite the right container for me, that it doesn't set me up for the kinds of conversations that I want to be having with people. So I moved to a more secular context where I primarily work as a leadership coach and facilitator. So I get to work with people in how their day job engages their values, engages the world that they want to be living in, engages the possibility of being this wiser, kinder, more courageous version of themselves. And that traction of like getting people where they're spending 8 hours a day is part of what really excites me in this.
we'll start with it must have been really hard to have thought that you wanted to do this thing for so long, something that also your dad did. Um,
Hmm.
what was the moment you decided this wasn't for you?
Mm,
Like, what was the exact moment you were like, how does this go? And
yeah.
then what did you do?
I have an opinion that with some of these really big decisions, there's no moment where you make the decision. You show up to it and one day discover that you have made it. But the making of the decisions happens somewhere in the background. Um, and this was one of those for me. I was noticing a lot of doubt and a lot of frustration during my first year. I was in a 5-year program toward becoming a rabbi, and as I went through the first year, I was really wrestling with um, can I say the things that I want to be saying in this language that I'm learning here, and can I use the container of a synagogue to have the conversations that I want to be having with people? And I was trying to find a way to make it work. And over the summer, it was actually right at the start of the summer, my father passed away. Um, we we just passed his 11th yahrzeit, the anniversary of his passing.
I'm so sorry.
And thank you. Um, it's been 11 years, and it's still tender. Have you? Are your parents alive?
Yes. Yeah. I
I'm
feel
glad
very
to hear.
lucky, yeah, to have
Yeah.
experienced that. But I have experienced loss, and something someone said, a lot of these things are just like very trite, but they're true, is like it's kind of like a stone in your pocket. Like it's always there, and sometimes you notice it, and it's heavier than others. But yeah.
Yeah. It's still tender. I still miss him. I still have moments where I just like, God, I wish I could talk to him about what I did today, this person I met today, whatever it is. Um, and it was really in my grieving of him, I discovered one day that I just couldn't get myself to go back to school. That
Um,
whatever was pulling me back there was gone, and I had to do something else. It was absolutely embarrassing it was a great sort of ego challenge of like, I've been telling everybody for years that this is what
Yeah.
my life is about. And I was really proud that this is what my life is about. So it took a kind of courage and a kind of, um, when I say humility, that's almost self-complimentary. Like really eating crow pie is the phrase that came to mind. Like I had to just acknowledge,
Yeah.
like, yep, I was wrong. I was wrong. And at the same time, the clarity of what I did want to do came fairly quick. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he asked, what about being a rabbi did still appeal to me? Like, what was it that drew me there that still felt true? And for me, that was this question of how do I help people grow? How do I help people be their best? How do I help people wrestle with themselves in like a useful, expansive way? And
Yeah.
I've been really lucky. This sort of leads into the next chapter of my story. I was really lucky to find a job with a company called Mobius Executive Leadership that does top-notch leadership development work, primarily with sort of vice president level and above. Um, that draws in a lot of the same psychotherapeutic influences that I had been studying in these years of preparing to be a rabbi, a lot of the somatic influences that I'd been studying. I went to massage school and I worked as a massage therapist for a couple of years. Um, a lot of the same spiritual influences from around the world, various meditative practices and I would even say it's true of Mobius that there's a sense of prayerfulness among the faculty, even though that's not always the face that we show to a client. That's not what clients need to see. But in who we are together, that's very real. Um, and that was a fantastic learning environment for me to become a coach and facilitator and to learn a lot about the different approaches to leadership development, professional development that happen in the workplace.
I want to talk more about that in a second. I want to kind of come
Yeah.
back to Judaism and religion.
Yeah, great.
One, one of the things that I love that you said is something we talk about a lot, which is that there's this language you learn of being a
Yeah.
rabbi. And in many ways, like there's so many of these different areas that you study. Even you studied massage therapy, super cool. You're looking at religious studies, but a lot of people today don't, they hear religion and all of a sudden they're like,
Yeah.
why do you think that is? Like, what happened?
Such a good question.
Um,
And I'll be transparent with you. I was even noticing like, ooh, I don't put this part of my history front and center all the time. If some potential client of mine is listening to this, will they be turned off by hearing the like religiosity of my background? So that is a real concern. And and I think people have that reaction, that sort of ooh, because so many of the religious voices that we hear in the public sphere are the most dogmatic or the most alienating, the most ethnocentric or xenophobic or pick your adjective, the alienating, right? The voices that insist on their way being the right way rather than the voices that celebrate that a tradition has deepened their lives in a personal sense. So I feel really grateful and proud of how my training in and experience with the Jewish tradition has deepened my own life and deepened the gifts that I can give to others. But I wouldn't want somebody to project onto me that I'm saying Judaism is the right way to be, or even that I agree with everything being done in the name of Judaism in the world.
yeah, it's interesting because when I was studying behavior change, originally, like religion is a container, regardless of the kind of religion, is in many ways it follows every principle of good behavior change, right? It's in
Hmm.
many ways it's like this way that helps guide you for living a
Yeah,
good life and holding you accountable to whatever that guide is. And
often with community that's like pursuing the same purposes with you. Yeah, it's great.
Exactly. And I think a lot about, everyone says like, oh, like, I'm not that into religion, but when you think about religion as a driver of purpose and positive behaviors, right?
Yeah.
Community, clear values, a community that lives those clear values with you. It's pretty powerful. Um, but yeah, I wanted to click on that because I think it's interesting because what you and I can appreciate, and actually a lot of our community, is that religion of any kind is one language. So then you go to Mobius, you start working through this other language. I'd love to pick up there. So, you know, my main question about kind of this chapter of your life is if you were to codify the three things that you have learned, the kind of three areas of study that you found most fascinating, like what would those be?
I love that. I love that question. Here's what's coming to my mind. Um, when I look at all of the leadership development frameworks that I've encountered, broadly speaking, I can sort them into three categories. And I'm gonna use those as my three things to answer your question. There's one that um, is oriented at um, including more of the whole human experience. So it's one you can and the thing I'm not counting here is simply training people in skills, because you can train people in skills all day long and they won't necessarily do them if they haven't found something inside themselves that really engages. So one area that I would call integrative work is you help people access these different qualities within themselves. What does it feel like to really be in courage, to be in assertiveness? What does it feel like to be in creativity and dreaming and inspiration? What does it feel like to be in connection and vulnerability and honoring somebody else's vulnerability? And you want to expand people kind of laterally with access to that whole range of human experiences. There's another set of work that I would call developmental that comes out of the adult development space that says the minds of adults are different from the minds of teenagers and children. And if we somehow continue that line from child to teenager to adult, where would it go next? And that looks at how can we hold a more complex view of the world and of ourselves that's still coherent. How can I take more perspectives into account with my perspective while making sense to myself instead of getting lost in all of that complexity? And you get there by really pulling yourself in two directions at once and finding where the tension is and kind of breathing with that tension until something new starts to make sense. And then there's a lot of particular techniques, but that's the general kind of work that I would call developmental work. And then there's work that I would call transformational work. And this is where I've particularly specialized, that I feel particularly devoted to, that says, um, I sometimes call this radically oversimplified neuroscience, that in any given moment, we can be in a state of thriving brain with access to our creativity and our learning and our connection with other people, our sense of purpose and values. Or we can be in a state of survival brain where we're in self protection. We're often very focused on the single thing that matters most. It's well suited to a single decider environment where either I'm going it alone or there's a command and control kind of structure. It's great at getting simple things done quickly. And that's often why we go there. It's not great at handling a lot of the challenges that the world most needs us to be handling in our lives. So how do you move from that threat response survival brain back into a thriving brain? That's what I would call transformational work. And the core of it is to recognize that survival brain is fueled by fear. And it pulls us into a state of fear. It pulls us into a state of threat response. When we can notice that fear and meet it with some gentleness, some kindness, hold it in a kind of deep love, kind of compassion, then that allows whatever's true in that fear to be there without limiting us to our survival brain. Lets us expand again up into the greater range of our thriving brain. So if I was going to
Love
offer
it.
three things to the world, it would be like explore the fullness of what you can be, all the different ways you can show up, and play with your own inner complexity, and practice meeting your fear with love, meeting your fear with kindness.
That's so cool. I love those. It's
That's
interesting. The
about
first
10
one,
years of leadership development training packed into four
you heard
minutes.
it here, 4 minutes. No, I mean it's so cool to hear you share this because it's again different language than we use at Mindy, but like very complementary. I think when you think
That's a
about
good
that
point.
like wide range of human existence, like I can't get over. I think about 98% of my clients, when I ask them how they're doing, need to pull out an emotion wheel. I mean, it's good or bad, you know what I mean, or
Yeah.
fine. We
Yeah.
don't have the like rich emotional language to then describe our experience such that we can appreciate it. Like it does feel binary. Things are either good or bad. And so I love that. Also, this idea of like human development as a grown up looking a bit different. And this last one I would love to explore with you, this idea of meeting fear with love. I think there's a lot of people who are probably listening who are like, oh my gosh, not this stuff. This stuff.
Yeah.
What's another way to say this to someone who might say, like, that feels soft to me? Like, I am afraid.
Yeah.
I know love is important, but like this language is feeling like a little too fuzzy for
Squishy.
me.
Yeah. Too fuzzy. Great. What's another way to say this? The first thing I would say to that person is survival brain is also great. Your survival brain is fantastic. We evolved with it to help us survive in circumstances where we needed that. And even today, in the business world, operating as a leader, there are moments when things really are urgent. And it is an excellent capacity to be able to focus on what needs to get done and do it and not let all the squishy stuff, all the fuzzy stuff get in the way. So the last thing I want anybody to hear is that like survival brain is bad and you shouldn't be in it and we should be singing Kumbaya all day long. At the same time, part of the strength of survival brain is this focus on what is urgently necessary right now. And what that blocks out is all of the nuance and the complexity and the wide angle view that's going to help me build a system around me that can meet the future really well. That's going to help me lay the foundations today for something incredible that I really want to have accomplished 5 years from now. You can't do that from survival brain. It's just not how your bits in your skull work. So if you want to be able to do something grand and beautiful and inspiring, something that you look back on at the end of your life and say like, yeah, that was worth it. That has to be coming from something other than urgency and fear and immediacy and survival brain. And I want that for you, whoever you are who's listening. Like, I want you to have that kind of greatness as well as putting out all the fires that burn through your day.
I love it. That's really cool. And I think like this is where language matters. And I just want to pull this back to the beginning of our conversation, which is that the language of becoming a rabbi didn't resonate with all the things that you wanted to say. And so you created your own container. And this is something I always suggest people think about, which is if you hear something and it rubs you the wrong way, normally we run the other way. But
Mm,
the real question is it just said in a way that isn't necessarily in line with how you're able to embody, embrace, enjoy it. And so a lot of times, whenever I feel a pinch, I find there's something to learn and usually something to translate. And so this was just one of those moments I thought we could take to translate because I would love you to teach us something, an exercise, something related to one of these three categories.
I will be so happy to do that. So
Thank
then
you.
the thing I want to teach is a practice you would call a slow practice. You have your language of stop, slow, and go. And this is a slowing technique for um, not just shifting in the moment from a survival state into a thriving state, but also eroding a little bit whatever the hook is that might be pulling you toward that survival state so that you're a little less threatenable next time by whatever's going on in your life.
Cool. I'm
Um,
in.
you're in. So this practice is called giving yourself a hug. And it is for the people who don't like the squishy, fuzzy stuff. It's a little squishy and fuzzy, but it's an acronym for how am I doing? Underneath that, what's at risk? And good to know, how do I want to address it? Or good to know what else could be true. So we're going to start with bringing to mind something that's stressing you out. Some situation where you haven't quite been at your best, where you've been using your survival brain, but maybe your thriving brain would go over better. Have you got something in mind? Okay. So let's start with the how am I doing? And as you call this situation to mind, imagine that a friend is sitting next to you and asking, what is it like inside you when this situation comes up? And you might notice, what are the thoughts, the stories that you tell yourself about this situation? And what are the emotions? You mentioned that feeling wheel. Right? What are the emotions that come up for you about this situation? None of them are wrong. It's just useful data. And then in your body, what are the sensations that come up when you think about this situation? It's really great to get familiar with the sensations of stress, the sensations of survival brain.
I'm just closing my eyes so I can go inside here.
Perfect. And I want you to picture this friend sitting next to you and just whatever's coming up, they're saying, oh, I so get that. I so get that. And then we can ask this question underneath that, what's at risk? So in this situation that's stressing you out, something could go wrong. And let's imagine that it went really, really wrong, almost cartoonishly terrible. And play out with that cartoon logic. What would the terrible outcome be? And then when the next dominoes fall down, how would it get even worse? What's the end result that's just intolerable? What's the really bad thing that some unconscious part of you thinks might happen and wants to protect you from? And this same friend who's sitting with you is also asking, and what would be the worst thing about that? What would hurt so much if that happened? When I do this, I get answers like, I wouldn't have a place in this world, or I would be a failure as a husband, as a father, as a professional. I would be alone. And when you find that, there's probably a sensation that goes along with that terrible outcome. So your friend can just notice that with you too. And take a breath with you and just say, yeah, I get that. That would be scary. That would be hard. It's natural. It's human to be afraid of it. It's natural to not want this in your life. So we honor that fear. We meet it with a lot of kindness. We bring some love to that scared, vulnerable part that hurts or is afraid. You might even picture physically giving a hug to wherever those sensations are in your body. Take a breath with it. Yeah. And then we can say, good to know. What else could be true? Because fear puts these blinders on and it blocks out a lot of other possibilities. So, yeah, this cartoonishly bad scenario might happen, but you could handle it. You could breathe through all of those terrible sensations. Yeah, that could also be true. And something else really good might also happen. And maybe that's even more likely. So we can orient towards the opportunity. And I'm choosing to take on the risk because of something that matters to me more. And you orient towards your values or your purpose. You can orient towards humor and kind of have a chuckle at yourself and be like, this is such a silly thing to be worrying about. I sometimes sit in my office and I think, I'm just a monkey. I'm just an evolved monkey. This is such a stupid, silly thing for a monkey to be worrying about. And that sense of humor can lighten things. You can orient towards all of the skills and resources, relationships that you have available to meet this challenge. Right? Like, yeah, this could go wrong, and there's a lot that I could do to deal with it while the dominoes are falling. I don't need to be bracing myself too far in advance. And as all of that settles in, all of those other possibilities, you might notice one of those questions resonated with you more than the others. And you might notice some clarity of how you might engage this situation differently, having given yourself this hug. So for those listening at home, I want to give you a moment to wonder how you might engage your stressful situation differently. And then Lissy, anything that happened for you during that little exercise, I'd be delighted to hear.
Yeah, I love it. It does kind of feel like a hug. I also really, I think, like at the beginning, you're thinking about everything that's stressing you out. You know, in my case, the example is like, we've had to pivot the business recently. And so the way that I'm selling has felt hard to me. And
Mm,
and so there's a lot of fear there about, am I doing the right thing? And a big thing for me is like timing, and am I going to tire myself out? And there's a lot there. And then, I mean, one, like the humor piece as like an antidote is something that I use almost everywhere and with everybody. But like, I love the idea of like us being monkeys, like what really matters. And two, like, one of my biggest fears was around time. But like the real
yeah,
truth is I'm doing my life's work. So like what's the
yeah,
rush? And so I think that
yeah,
there's like this yeah, giving myself the space and time to really sit with this. Like for those at home, you're probably thinking like, okay, I could probably do that in like a minute. I could just like write down a question and answer it. But it is different when you're forced to sit with it and when you're engaging not just the mind, but the body.
beautiful. That's totally right. And you can do this with a little practice. You can do this well in about 2 minutes. Takes a
Love
few
it.
deep breaths to really move through it. And I like to go slower than that when people are learning. But the key, exactly as you said, is feeling that shift in your body, because so much of our intelligence is in our bodies, so much of the stress is in our bodies, and then so much of the safety and competence and confidence is in our bodies when we find that again. So we got to slow down enough to let that happen.
Amazing. I love it. Now, I'm going to ask you two quick questions because
Great.
I'm noticing we're on time. I feel very zen now. What else can we do? It's so great. Um, so this is amazing. You, in many ways, are a healer, a helper. You support other leaders in doing their work. I'm curious, like who, what, or what sayings, advice are you coming back to today that kind of guide you through whatever it is you're moving through these days?
That is so delightful. One that comes to mind comes from a teacher named Thomas Hubel who has inspired me. And he talks about making a commitment to learn from every difficulty. And that when life is hard, a lot like what you said about a pinch, right? That there's something to learn there. So if I can have the presence of mind to notice that there's a difficulty and say this is a learning opportunity and not only a source of suffering, it's also very kind of Carol Dweck growth mindset to be able to notice that.
Yeah.
That's huge. And the other that I think goes hand in hand with it really well comes from a yoga teacher. I used to go to his class every week. My favorite teacher, and every week he would say something like, yoga is not about flexibility, it's about meeting your inflexibility with kindness. And every time he said that, my hamstrings would get about 3/4 of an inch longer, and I would just settle that much deeper into my pose. And it's very true in yoga, and it's very true in the work that we do. You hear it in that giving yourself a hug process. So at the same time as I want to be learning from every difficulty, I also want to be meeting the parts of me that are learning really gently with a lot of support rather than like, why haven't you learned already? Because that voice is in my head, but that voice tends not to be very helpful.
Totally. It is, it's helpful to know that even you have that voice in your head, because I think for a lot of folks, they're like, these people have it all figured out. It's like, no, this is the work. And it's why we call it fitness, because you're always working on it, engaging with
It's
it,
always a journey.
practicing it. Next question for you is, where can people find you?
Yeah. My website is presencetree.com. That's presence with a C, tree.com. And I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me. I'm the only Yotam Schachter on there, and I will be delighted to hear from any listeners of this podcast.
Amazing. Well, thank you so, so much for joining us today. This was absolutely fabulous. For me, some of my biggest takeaways are around, again, that so much of your work has really been about helping adults explore we'll call it rainbow of human emotion and experience, which is a practice and takes work. Also, this giving myself a hug, we'll make sure to put some of that in the show notes too, so that people have those questions as a takeaway, as an exercise. And also, I do feel lighter from giving myself a hug through the lens of these 3 questions. Sometimes I tape voice notes, and then I'll listen back to them as an exercise to myself. So I'm excited to tape a hug version of that so that I can walk myself through this.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been really fun.
It's been so much fun. All right. We'll see everybody on our next episode. Thank you so much for joining us to explore another modern mind.